week, Michele?
I had a great week, and I hope you did too.
I did. I am Jerry Kane, retired sergeant, speaking from the Sergeants Benevolent Association in New York City. And we're going to talk about a couple of things this week that are impacting us here in New York City. Just like last week, we're gonna open up talking about bail reform. It really hit hard this week with a serial bank robber robbing 6 banks in a span of 12 days and being arrested 3 times for it. And finally, the federal government had enough.
Yeah.
And the FBI, at the request of the police department, went and arrested him, and he's been charged in federal court, and he's now remanded and not out there robbing banks.
Yeah, I heard that this morning. It's a little crazy because, last week they had the Nassau County Police Commissioner on, Good Day New York, and he was saying, it's ridiculous. Like it's a defeatist attitude. Nobody, as soon as you lock somebody up, you have a civilian basically telling them, okay, it's good to go. And I said it last week. I don't know how the courts were run in any other borough, but in the Bronx, it was run by the civilians. So, the civilians checked your prints, the civilians told you what to do, and the bosses were afraid of them. So this is just like amplified even more.
Yeah, one of the things about bail reform, we talked about it last week, and we don't have to retread it. A lot of the crimes that qualify for bail reform are called nonviolent crimes, but it doesn't mean that the victims aren't emotionally traumatized and people are taking real losses, either financial losses, they lose time at work because they have to repair things. The criminals are really impacting people, and when you're not remanding them and they're just free to keep going out, committing crimes, we're tying up resources, rearresting them all the time. We're not interrupting the cycle of crime, which is an important part of what law enforcers do. And, it's terrible. I know that they allow assault 1 and robbery 1 are considered violent crimes, but assault 2 isn't considered a violent crime.
Yeah.
And I've been punched in the face. You've probably been punched in the face, Michele. And that's
I know it looks it, but no, I haven't, Jerry. Thank you though.
I'm about to get punched in the face again.
No, but yeah, I would agree with you though. Assault, you're somehow invading somebody's other space,
right?
If that makes sense,
right? How
can that not? And the other thing too is that nobody's making notifications, obviously. So when you lock somebody up, they're just like constant. Okay, he did this. All right, yeah, let him go.
Well, it's possible, I think, because we all know how the criminal justice system works. It works slowly.
Yeah.
And I think it's possible that the legislators who wrote this in the middle of the night as part of a budget budget submission, they snuck it in under the Budget Act last spring. They didn't understand that notifications don't get made in real time or even anything close to real time for that matter. Right. So, yeah. Well, that's so the budget, right, for people who even live in the state who might not know how this bail reform came about, it wasn't a bill that went before a committee and it was discussed and they had expert testimony and then it was debated on the floor of the Assembly and the Senate and then signed by the governor. It was stuck in to the budget bill that comes out in the last week of March every year in Albany. And it was put in there with all kinds of pork barrel projects and all kinds of sneaky expenditures. And people sometimes wonder, where does this $1 billion come to do this or the multi-$100 million come to do that? And they don't ever remember seeing it at all.
Right.
It gets stuck into these little sneaky middle-of-the-night bills because our state has a dysfunctional legislative process.
Right. And, other states have bail reform, but they did it in a much better way than we did it. And the other thing, then people say, well, they have to go back and they have to adjust this. But I don't think anybody wants to be the senator or the congressman that says, I know robbery or assault 2 wasn't that then, so I'm sorry, but now we let them, now we have them for bail. How are you going to tell the victims of all these people that have been getting out, now we're going to change the crime? Well, nobody wants to be the bad guy to do that.
Well, I guess in a state and a city where you have one-party rule, right? And general elections now have been, completely neutered. They don't mean anything, right?
Right.
So the whole thing for these elected officials is the primary, and so they're all racing to the left, as far left as they possibly can go, to give themselves some kind of bulletproof protection against a radical primary challenger.
Right.
They all saw what AOC did. I forget the name of the congressman who she dethroned in Queens.
Right.
But the guy had been around forever and ever and ever. And she came in a primary and beat him. And once she beat him in a primary, it was over. There was there was no Republican challenger who could really take her on.
Yeah.
So everybody else saw that, and they're all racing to the left now as fast as they can go. It's terrible. So along with our bail reform, the feds have also been making a lot of noise this week in New York City. The director of ICE came to New York and called out the city for their failure with the terrible case in Queens where the 92-year-old woman, I want to make sure I get her name right, was sexually assaulted and left for dead. Maria Fuertes.
Okay.
She was 92 years old. Her son, is Hugo, is actually blaming both the city and the federal government. He thinks that the federal government had a chance to put this guy into jail, and he thought that the city should have let the feds put him in jail. And now this poor guy Hugo, his mom, was sexually assaulted, strangled, and died on the street. She laid there in the street for 2 hours before she was discovered. It's about as horrible a murder as you can imagine. And nobody should ever have to feel the fear that this woman felt for those 2 hours before she passed that she felt. There's a lot of blame going around. So we have the head of ICE called out the city. Mayor de Blasio called out ICE, called them goons. I think the people at ICE are professional law enforcement agents and officers, and I don't think they're necessarily should be called goons by anybody. It's a pretty disparaging remark to say to someone. It would be nice if there were some adults in the room that could come to some kind of common sense solution about this issue.
Well, they're blaming the NYPD because they said that well, the thing is that, I don't know, I remember when you used to ask somebody if they're a resident, and if they said no, you just marked no, and you didn't do anything. So we're not trained to, if ICE wants them, maybe they should have a few people assigned here to come and pick them up, because how would you feel if you lived in a high crime area and a robbery was happening, but there was no cops available because they were taking this guy? You know what I mean? Like, we don't have enough people to be worrying about. You have to have more ICE officers. You have to.
Yeah. So for people who don't live in New York City or not familiar with this topic, but it's not unique to New York. New York City is a sanctuary city, and what that means is we don't notify ICE when we have custody of someone. It used to be many years ago, and this is not kind of a new thing for New York. We didn't ask people their immigration status when we were interviewing them. Witnesses and victims of crimes, we didn't care. It wasn't our problem. It only became an issue when you actually arrested them. And so now they've kind of upped the ante on it a little bit, and over the past decade or so. And now even when we have someone in custody for a heinous crime, and we know that they're an illegal immigrant, we don't notify ICE that we have them. And ICE sometimes finds out that we have them, and they send us what's called a detainer notice. And they say, hey, if this guy gets out on bail or if he's released for some other thing, please let us know. We're going to scoop him up.
Right.
But the city doesn't do that.
Right.
The guy gets out, and in this case, it was a terrible tragedy. So the suspect in this case, who was an illegal immigrant from Guyana and who had been previously arrested for assault of his father and was let out because of the Bail Reform Act, and the detainer notice was not honored by New York City, so the feds weren't able to scoop him up. So he's now being held for murder, and the feds have filed a warrant with the court that if he is released under any circumstances, which he probably won't be,
Right.
they're going to deport him back to Guyana. I'm guessing they'll deport him to Guyana in about 25 years when he's released after he does his sentence.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, again, too, the resources that we have as the NYPD, they're stretched right now because there's a lot of issues going on. There's the homeless, the mentally ill population that we try to take care of. There's regular law-abiding citizens that people seem to forget about that we have to take care of as well. Just regular things. Not everybody calls the police for violent crimes. Sometimes they call us just, to help them out. But, like as far as ICE goes, I mean, somebody's dropping the ball somewhere. Some desk officer's going to get yelled at for that one, coming down the pipe.
Why is it always, we like to say here, we said it last week, that the police get blamed for everything.
Yeah,
well, why
okay.
do the sergeants get blamed for everything? I don't know why that is.
I think it's because they have to babysit. They have to babysit the cops. That's really what a sergeant does now.
You're part boss and you're part union delegate when you're
You
a
really
sergeant.
are, and so I don't know. Now they have to make a log for that. You know how the police department makes logs for everything? Now we have to have an ICE log, a notification. You're gonna have to make a notification log. Mark this. It's gonna be a patrol guide procedure soon.
For our listeners who aren't New York City cops, apparently 100 years ago, some police chief probably had a brother who was in the bookbinding business. And every single thing that you can think of in the NYPD must be entered into a giant, hard-covered, bound, 200-page book with 12 by 30-inch pages. And we're personally keeping the paper mill business, the bookbinding business afloat with the purchase of these things.
Get a log for that. We're going to start a log for that.
There are logs for overtime. There are logs for signing out even smaller logs, little memo books that cops have to carry. There's a log to sign those out. There are logs for everything you can imagine in the NYPD.
That's right.
And you are 100% correct. Someone will not make a log entry, and they'll get a ding for that and lose a couple hours pay maybe.
Yeah. But, the other thing, too, is that people, there's a lot of, fringe people that live on the out of society, So when they hear things like, oh, wow, I'm getting released if I only do this, well, that's a great idea. Now I think I'm going to try something. Or if they don't like the way that the justice system is going, now you have a whole other issue of, I'm going to take care of this myself. And, you don't need a bunch of people running around taking the law into their own hands either.
That's an interesting point. If there's a significant slip in the crime rate here in New York City, and the mayor often says that the city is the safest big city in the country, and it is the safest big city in the country. There's no question about it. I travel all around. No place is as safe as New York, and there's been a lot of work that's been put into making that possible. But it can slip. It doesn't mean just because we've been successful that we'll continue to be successful.
Right, exactly.
And if there is a slip and the crime rate does go up, particularly the things that affect people, right? If you feel like you can't keep anything nice in the city without it being vandalized or stolen, if you feel like your loved one can't go out at night because it's not safe, or if you feel you can't go someplace at night where you think you can't be on the train, it's gonna affect the city. The city, I know I'm an older guy. I remember how bad the city was. And I live in Brooklyn. I thought about moving out of the city with my family. I thought about moving upstate, and I stayed. I'm very happy that I stayed in Brooklyn. But if the city didn't turn it around, they did a couple of smart things. They invested money properly, but they let the police do their job. They put bad guys in jail. We call them bad guys for a reason. They're not good people. They're bad people.
Right.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. And, New York it is very safe. I mean, there's always going to be crime no matter what because it's a city and there's a lot of people and a lot of people come to visit us. And, but, I also look at the, right around the block when I was coming here today, there was a lady walking her dog. She had a Canada Goose jacket, and the two dogs, they were pit bulls, they had Canada Goose jackets on too. So I think that for the most part, the city's pretty safe because that was, you know what I mean? So you have two big extremes here. We have extremes of people that can afford that, and then we have poverty, So we all have to, there's a whole mix of people here.
So that is a true thing, right? The police always get stuck with every problem
Right.
known to man. They get stuck with the homeless and mentally ill problem.
Right.
They get stuck between the rich and the poor
Right.
when there's that friction between them. They get stuck in these First Amendment issues when they have to protect the right of some people to protest and protect the rights of other people
Yep.
who want to counter-protest, and of course protect the rights of everybody else to be in the middle, right?
Right.
We do have a mayor here in the city who ran on an anti-police campaign 8 years ago.
Right.
He obviously, he'll never get the police department back. He lost the police department after Ramos and Lou were assassinated. But he certainly does appear to me that he has come to the realization that the police department is the most important agency that he has
Right.
under his authority.
Yeah.
Because without the police department, if they don't do their job and they don't do it well,
Right.
he would never be reelected. It would just be a constant cycle of one-term mayors, right?
Exactly.
He let Bill Bratton do his job. He kind of hamstrung Jim O'Neill a bit. We'll see what he does with Dermot Shea. This is a play that's in its first act. Dermot Shea's a brilliant guy. I hope that he lets him run the police department, especially with these challenges that we have now with the bail reform.
Right, and like the police department too. It's also the NYPD has also evolved. One of the things that a lot of smaller agencies don't have the resources we have, and and a lot of smaller agencies sometimes don't want to call out to big cities or the feds for help. But the most important thing is that, all these agencies, even like with the mayor, the police department is really always the first line, because if there's a fire, they call the fire department, right? If there's anything else wrong, they always call the police department. If it's a neighbor dispute, if it's a civil matter, somebody hit your car, if it's a car, it's everything. Yes. Somebody gets sick, they call the police. Somebody does this, they call the police. So we're very well trained in like how to adjust to a lot of things, how to adjust to a lot of situations, how to adjust to thinking off the top of your head. And that's what people have to realize. We didn't just go after bad guys. Sometimes we had to help out at school crossings. Sometimes, so many different community-orientated things that people don't realize it. So everybody who has a problem, every social problem, always comes to the police. And that's just, it's just how it is. So, like, I know the police department, like, when it first started out, they used to have this little rules and procedures book. It was like 10 pages. And now it's about 1,000 pages. Because somebody does something wrong, they're going to fix it. They've always done what they could to address it. But the mayor has to also realize that, let us figure it out. We also reach out to different agencies. We don't just say, hey, let's just try this. It's not me and Jerry sitting in the office saying, hey, it'd be fun. Let's try this. Let's see if this works.
Sometimes it is that, though.
And sometimes it is like that. And those are usually the ones that turn out drastically not very well.
So you made an interesting point about resources and the resources that New York City has. Mm-hmm. It was an interesting article the other day about bail reform that said that New York City is expecting to spend $100 million more this fiscal year, than last, to fund the district attorney's offices to meet the discovery mandates that the bail reform bill has. And for those out there that aren't criminal justice buffs, it used to be that there was quite a long time before the district attorney here in New York State, in any of the jurisdictions, there's 62 counties, I believe, in the state. The district attorney had a long time to hand over physical evidence, and that would include lab tests and other things from narcotics. You were a narcotics officer for a long time, hero detective in the Bronx. We never want to have to mix it up with Michele, so kick our butt. So now you have to hand over the physical evidence quicker. You have to hand over testimonial evidence and provide access to the crime scene
Right.
and things like burglaries and robberies and stuff like this, which
Right.
is definitely going to victimize victims one more time.
Yeah.
Now in New York City, which has like a 14 or 15 billion dollar budget, the mayor was able to allocate $100 million to give to the DAs.
Right.
Some of these counties upstate, these rural counties that have no money,
Right.
they are gonna, what they're gonna do is they're either gonna dismiss cases or they're going to adjourn cases.
Yeah.
And that means the perpetrator is going to be back out. Now, a lot of times the perpetrator maybe, they are just charged with a crime. They aren't innocent until proven guilty. But you also have to live in the real world. It's not
Right.
just an academic discussion in a university. If they don't have jobs and they're hooked on drugs and this is what they've been doing for their whole life, they're going to go. They're going to go back to.
That's all they know.
To doing crime.
Right.
So you're going to see in these upstate communities that are ravaged by meth and heroin. I think that's the place where you're going to see it first. Before New York City, where we have a really resilient and agile police force, and we do have funding. I think in like all these places upstate, like I'm going to Albany later to the New York State Sheriff's Conference. I'll be interested to hear what they have to say about this. I'm sure they're all girding for this.
Right. And the other thing too is, like, especially in those towns upstate, like the state police are the local police there. So now they're even, again, it's making it's getting and tapping into resources that are already stretched to the limit. Again, like as far as like the overtime, like what happens if you're transporting a perp from ICE? Like, do you get paid overtime for that? Because I would have hopped on that bandwagon in a heartbeat. You just drop them off. And when you drop them off at ICE, is it like just easy? Like, is it like, here you go, here's the paperwork? Or is it like the nightmare that when they have a warrant, and then you try to look it up and you get all that help from the guys in the court system that try, I'll get it for you in a minute. People have to realize how the court really works, and nothing happens. Everybody goes to lunch from 1 to 2. That's why when you watch court TV, there's always a break from 1 to 2. It happens all over. They all do, and other things happen. Like there's side deals made. There's not always things that there. And when I say side deals, there's plea bargains made. There's a whole bunch of different things that happen. People have to realize that you can go on any website and find the laws that make it so you can get out in an hour. I'm not suggesting you do that, but you should educate yourself on the list. People would look at that list and be like, "That's not in New York State." Yeah, it is. You got to, you have to really start to pay attention to certain things, because when the guy who just burglarized your house is driving around your neighborhood again, you're not going to be too happy.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride here in New York this year. We'll see. Hey, you know what? And we could be proven wrong.
Right.
I doubt it, by the way. But you never know.
I haven't heard anybody say anything good. Like, I have not heard one person say, "This was a great idea. This is fantastic. Let's let them all out." It's like, if I did it, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens if I put all the Legos in the oven.
New Jersey, like you said it earlier, that some states did it right. In New Jersey, they allow judges to consider two things: the danger to the community of letting the guy out, or the possibility that the person will recommit a crime, or the possibility that they won't show up to court.
Right.
So, and you could usually tell that from a person's criminal history. Oh, he's got a history of not showing up for court. He's got a history of reoffending.
Yes.
Or he's got a history of hurting people, right? There's a great quote by Richard Donoghue, who's the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District, and talking about the New York law. He said, "Preventing judges from considering the danger a charged defendant poses to the public when making a pretrial confinement decision defies common sense and endangers all New Yorkers." He's right. Know, and we elect these judges, and in some cases they're appointed. But we call them judges for a reason.
Right, judges are very smart people, and they've no matter what you think about them, if I didn't have to go to law school, I would love to have been a judge. It's just they have cool.
That damn law school.
That's the only thing that kept me out of it, was that law school thing. But otherwise, that's a great gig because, and they're tough. They're not all like they've seen everything. Ironically, this whole bail reform that was made was to help people that were poor. And there was an incident where a guy was kept in Rikers for like 4 or 5 years. You know, again, the system was broken already.
Right.
And this is certainly not a solution, but you're just putting people more in debt now.
Yeah.
You know, poor people who are victims of a crime now.
So I'm glad you brought that point up. What a lot of people need to know, and I assume we have listeners out there from all over the place, right? And if you live in a really nice community and it's economically upscale, you might not ever see a police car come down your block, like for a month, right? Because nothing happens.
Like if you live out on Nassau, Suffolk County, like in Long Island.
Right. Or even in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Brooklyn. I live in Brooklyn. I live in the 68th precinct.
Yeah.
I can go a week without seeing a police car.
Yeah, I worked in the 4-5, yes.
So I was the other day, I had to spend a couple hours in the 7-0. And within just a few hours, like 4 or 5 times, police cars were screaming by me, lights and sirens going to a hot job. And the 7-0 is an economically challenged precinct. Mm-hmm. And people that live in economically challenged areas bear the brunt of crime. There's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. And but what people need to know everywhere is that race doesn't drive crime, religion doesn't drive crime, economics drives crime. Yes. I don't care where you are on the planet. Mm-hmm. Poor people are victimized by criminals, and they make up criminals.
Right.
Wherever you are. And I'm sure on other planets it's the same thing, for crying out loud.
Right.
So these changes are going to, be, I'm making air quotes here for listeners, fair to charge defendants. But if it causes crime to go up, it's going to hurt people in these neighborhoods. And of course, who's going to be there to try to solve it? The police.
Right. Well, and the other thing too, economically, I mean, you're just drawing from, you keep using resources to rearrest people and reprocess that whole system, reprocessing and everything. And meanwhile, what we can actually use those funds, maybe to do something for less, less wealthy neighborhoods.
You mean there isn't an infinite amount of funds available?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. They like to raise taxes in this state also. So
yeah, and actually everything is so expensive in New York that's the other thing. You know, you have two very big extremes. You really do. So that's it. Things have to change. People have to start to be chill out a little bit. They got to calm down.
Well, I understand that. That's for sure. So we got coming up this year is going to be the vehicle congestion tax.
I'm looking forward to that. I love that. Sounds like a great idea to draw more money in. And
I just read today that there's that the meetings are being held in secret, which is, by the way, against New York State law. There's like a transparency law in New York State that you have to have these committee meetings in public or be publicly available in one way or the other. And they're in secret because they're trying to figure out what they're going to charge, who they're going to carve out from being charged. Mm-hmm. Is it fair to a fireman or cop that works in the congestion zone to charge him the congestion fee to drive to work?
I worked in the Bronx, and I always had to pay a toll, so I don't have any sympathy right now. Yeah, I had to pay a toll to go over the Throgs Neck Bridge. I had to pay a stupid toll. I hated that. And we always used to tell our delegate, can't we get a free toll? And they said, no, there's TBTA guys. I go, well, how come we have to help them lock people up? Yeah.
Well, so...
We have the Verrazano. So.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's tolls all over,
So, So before we wrap up, I'm going to we'll give a little history lesson to our listeners.
Okay.
Something that the NYPD has that was invented shortly after the car, and that's called highway therapy. And that's where Big Boss looks at where you live and looks at where they can put you and figures out how many toll bridges they can make you cross.
Yeah.
Oh, you live in Staten Island?
Yeah.
Let's have you work in the Bronx.
Yeah.
You live in Nassau County? Let's have you work in Staten Island.
Your shoes are dirty at the Yankee Stadium detail a week after 9/11. You're going to Manhattan from Rockland. Thank you. Tony Bones. That happened to T-Bones.
T-Bones, huh?
Yeah.
It sounds like that's a great nickname, whatever this guy's...
We used to have nicknames.
Yeah.
I won't tell you what mine was because we'd have to edit it. You can come and see me, though, at my show, and I'll be more than happy to tell you.
So, Michele, before we wrap up, please tell us where you're performing this week.
This week I'll be at the Climate Lounge all day on Saturday.
All
Yeah.
day comedy
Parties,
fest?
listen, parties of 10 or more have to get tickets online because I can't do math at the door.
Okay, very good, very good. And I'll be appearing in my kitchen, cooking dinner this week for my family.
Yeah.
And in other places.
Yeah.
Oh, with my new air fryer.
The air fryer. We're going to hear all about
Yes.
Jerry and the air
I'll be
fryer
talking
next
about
week.
the air fryer next week. So thanks for listening to Inside Blue 360. Again, I'm Jerry Kane.
Oh, Michele Durante, you have a great week.
And stay safe.